Hello everybody, this is Axter from the Players Council, and today we are going to take a look at a request which I received from one of the members of the community, asking me to go over races and their weaknesses as well as strengths, and also to make some kind of tier list of strategies that are playable in certain formats, in the most played formats probably. Because this is very difficult to grasp, I thought about it a bit and I wanted to put it into several sections. So today I'm going to focus on individual Free People's cultures, speak about their pros and cons, also mention something called pairing, and I'm going to mention some essential things in terms of deck building when you want to select what you are going to play, then what to look out for. Now let's get straight to the business. So there are 5 things that I like to think about when I'm building a deck myself. The first is, I need to have something to discard conditions. So what could that be? Those could be events, even companions, or perhaps some equipment that says that I discard an opponent's condition or more of them. Ideal case scenario, something like Sleepcar Address that wipes the whole board of Moria, and then I am much safer. Another point are possessions. Much like the conditions, if I play against Corsairs, letting my opponent do what he wants with his support area is probably going to cost me the game, so I want to have something in my deck that removes the possessions. The third point are burdens. What I mean by that is that my ring bearer either has to have very high resistance or he has to have some tool in the deck that will prevent him from being corrupted by some sort of corruption. There are several cards, the most iconic one of them on both Fellowship as well as movie is Sam, that removes 3 burdens typically in Fellowship phase, and that does a lot. Typically it is enough to deal with any sort of corruption. Strength. By this point I mean that you need to be able to protect yourself against potential overwhelming situations when the minion has, for example, 20 strength and your companion only has 10, then you would die, so you need to have some sort of buff on board or in hand. Those could be events, extra equipment, or certain companions that add strength to the others, such as Merry from Fellowship of the Ring. And the last point are the wounds, or I could say heals. So if you play against Shadow strategy that tries to put as many wounds on board as possible, then it is good to have something in the deck that would prevent this situation. The 5 heals on the 3rd and 6th sides in Sanctuary are probably not going to save you if your opponent's strategy is all focused on wounding you to death. Alright, so those are the 5 points that we need to keep in mind. I'll keep this tab open and we will probably get back to it as I run into some references, and now let's get to the cultures. First are the dwarves. Very strong race, and I should probably say that I'm mostly going to talk about movie block by Decipher with a little adjustment that is typical for the Czech community, which plays tournaments each month, even in 2024/2025. And the adjustment that we have put in motion is that we do not play Galadriel Later Redeemed and Corsair Marauder and Goblin Scimitar combo. So, keeping that in mind, what can we say about the dwarves? Well, firstly, they have very cheap equipment, all of their weapons, also some wound preventing positions such as bracers, and even their healing artifacts are very cheap. That creates a sort of choke on board and makes it very difficult for any wounding shadow to kill them effectively. Another very important thing that is very beneficial for the dwarves is that they have a very strong ring bearer, Gimli. Along with him, you are able to play Linar and Durin and make a very resilient starting fellowship. This is a very typical deck. It is, in my opinion, top 3, if not the best of them all, due to its low cost, high reward sort of style. A very important thing that I need to mention, very important card that is Bloodrun's Chill. This card doesn't care what your opponent plays. In regroup, it will get rid of any setup that the shadow player is trying to make. That keeps your fellowship safe in most of the situations and makes this deck one of the best pairs for any shadow that needs more time. Dwarves are basically unkillable when you play this card in the deck. One more thing as for the pros of the Dwarven culture that I should mention is Gimli, Feared X-Man, which gives you the opportunity to play some sort of preparations based deck. That's a card I forgot to add here. Preparations works in such a way that you stack something onto it, and then when the time comes you shuffle it back into the deck, typically deck that is empty at that point, by discard pressed by Blind Knight. So when the deck is empty, you shuffle this and perhaps 7 other shadow cards into your empty deck, and you have a perfect hand to kill your opponent. You might argue that it's easy for your opponent to just discard preparations before that happens, and that's why you play Gimli, Feared X-Man. Very interesting strategy. Now some cons of the Dwarven culture. They have very cheap possessions and artifacts, but just like any other choke, if they want to make a double move, then the Twilight Pool is going to escalate. There's going to be much more in the Twilight Pool, and they don't have many ways how to do magic when they play all their stuff from hands. The most that you can get from them is usually some sort of event buff like Axe Strike. You can dance around preparations a bit, but if you play Gimli, then you don't typically have Durin on board. I mean, if you play Gimli, Feared X-Man. And vice versa. If you don't play this Gimli, you have Gimli Ringbearer, then you don't play preparations because it would be very easy to discard them. So it is a sort of a, what's the phrase? In Czech we say something like two-sided coin. That means that it is going to be good for you as well as bad for you that you choke with dwarves, because if you need to make a double move, then it is going to be difficult for you in terms of Twilight. Alright, on to the next race. The Elves. The Elves are very strong in movie because firstly they have a very strong starting fellowship, that is Glorfindel with Greenleaf, Legolas. So it has a strong companion and that solves the strength problem. It has Legolas, which also solves the strength problem in a way. If your opponent tries to play Swarm and kill your Ring Bearer, then you can reduce their numbers by Greenleaf's ability and you are safe. An important thing about the Elven culture also is that they have a lot of events which counter many strategies in a very simple way. Let's take Mordor. Mordor in movie is typically going to play big bad trolls or Sauron, or in general some big minions that threaten some kind of overwhelm situation or a lot of wounds on board, and cards like Stand Against Darkness just make fun of them. You exert an elf, for example Galadriel, and to discard a Mordor minion, any minion, even Sauron. That's a very high reward for a very low cost. Now another example. In the past, I have mentioned a very typical swarm of cheap minions, which looks something like this. This is what I could be holding in my hand when I'm preparing for the 4th site to kill my opponent there, because that is the first chance I get to play my minions, which are not roaming at that point. And let's take 3 runners. Those are my 8 cards in hands. I play everything, but wait, not yet, because my opponent plays Cursed Foul Feet, and he discards almost my entire hand. And that's bad for me, because I need to get another setup. And my opponent is probably not going to play only one version, only one copy of this card. He's probably going to play 2, and that is going to be enough for him to survive against my swarm strategy. If I try to play any sort of condition play, such as Moria or Besiegers or perhaps Hillman, those are also slightly condition based, then my opponent easily plays Secret Sentinels, or he gets rid of my conditions in an even more annoying way through Villia. And in movie, a very important ring exists that gets to tutor the ring from the deck. Tutor means to search for it and play it. And that is a very easy way how to deal with a lot of strategies. I would say that Villia is one of the most iconic tier 2 decks. That means decks which are not the top of the top, the top of the best. And if you play Villia and Elrond, then you put their essential conditions in hand each maneuver phase, and that is very annoying for the Shadow player to deal with. Some cards that deserve mentioning, for example, Shadow Between and Elrond for extra life sustain. A very good combination with Gondor comes through the last alliance of men and elves, or elves and men. Then, if you pair it up with hobbits, you can play Dauntless Hunter, which creates a very interesting choke. Another deck which is very famous and very strong is the Telepathy, working around Gandalf, Manager of Wizards, who, just to give you an example, puts 3 cards on top of the deck, and the last card that you put there is probably going to be something like Sauron. Then you reveal the card and make minion -18 strength. And in a very similar way works Círdan, who is able to make a minion 0 strength just by playing events in the deck, which is what you want to do anyway. Alright, so elves, a very strong culture. In general, they are able to deal with almost anything, but what they cannot deal with directly are possessions. That's why you often see them paired up with Gandalf. It's not just because he pairs up well with 4-armed. It's also because Corsairs could pose a threat to you. Not in the standard Decipher movie though, where Galadriel Lady Redeemed doesn't really have any ban, any restriction, and that's why Corsairs are very weak against her, or at least should be, on paper. Now about some cons of this strategy. If you do decide to play Galadriel Ringbearer, then Mordor can counter you with Terrible as Dawn, which kills the Ringbearer. This card doesn't care if the Ringbearer is Galadriel, or if Galadriel is the Ringbearer. It was originally meant to kill the ally, but here it serves even more drastic purpose that it kills the Ringbearer immediately. The alternative cost to discard 2 elves isn't usually worth it, or it also means the end of the game anyway. Another con of this culture could be that the companions themselves are pretty weak early. So something like the advance assault early in the game could kill your starting fellowship. let's say that you play Galadriel and Greenleaf and Glorfindel, and you play something like Shadow Between, and perhaps one more thing like Elrond. Then if you do the maths, the second side on movie typically costs 3 Twilight, that is 3 for your companions, 2 for Shadow Between, 4 for Elrond, 3 for the companions, etc. And your opponent plays these 2 minions and your starting fellowship is gone. So that's a very simple way how to get punished for playing the elves. But then again, you have cards like Stand Against Darkness, so in general, a very resilient, very strong culture, and that's why it sees so much play in tournaments. Now let's get to Gandalf. Gandalf culture is probably the strongest of them all, at least in movie. Gandalf has always been this free people's character that made fun of all support area based shadow strategies, because he's able to discard conditions very easily via Deep in Thought, Grown Suddenly Tall, Sleep Caradhras in Fellowship, and then possessions by Roll of Thunder. Now if you take a look at our conditions, well, literally the conditions in this way are dealt with, possessions as well. In movie you are able to play Sam, Son of Hamfast, which removes burdens like there's no tomorrow. Strength is usually solved by Treebeard and Servant of the Secret Fire, and the wounds can be solved by Have Patience. So that's why Ents are such a strong deck, because they have answer to everything, and it is in general very difficult to stop them or deal enough damage to them that they have to stop or even lose the game. Now I should mention something from Fellowship block, and oops, there is a mistake. This is supposed to be Conjuring. Alright, now it's correct. So something from Fellowship. There Gandalf is also very strong. Possessions are not so essential because shadow possessions are not so strong in Fellowship as they are in movie. And Gandalf is able to discard shadow conditions in a very simple way by Sleep Caradhras. Of course, you can say that there are cards like Too Great and Terrible, which are able to at least limit Gandalf's supremacy somehow, but it usually doesn't solve everything. It only wounds Gandalf a bit, and then you have to play Nazgul, which in general have a hard time finishing off any free peoples. So it comes at a cost, and usually Gandalf wins against those strategies anyway. Now something that people do not usually use too much, and it's a mistake, is a wizard is never late. Then they complain that the wizard comes late, but that's what the card was made for. And if you play this 3 times and you play Saved from the Fire, which is one of the most overpowered cards in the whole movie format, then you are able to find 3 copies of this. You play 3 companions, you have 6 less free people's cards in the deck, which helps your shadow strategy. You play Treebeard and Lindenroot and Skimbark, and you are able to withstand a great force. So that's why the Ents again are so popular, because this is a very strong combination and the free peoples is very difficult to beat at that point. Extra cards for sustain would be Narya and Moment of Respite, which deal with burdens and wounds, at least in a slight way. There are some more ways how to deal with conditions, such as Albert Dreary, and a very universal card is Barliman Butterbur, which gives you one of those crucial events back into your hand. Groundring, a very underrated card in movie. It is very typical for Fellowship to take a look at your opponent's hand and make a decision based on what you see. People tend to think that that is not the case in movie anymore, but a good look can change the result of the game at a certain point. So if you know what you are looking for and you can exert, you see that your opponent has no Enquia, so you play 4 companions, you get to 8 for example, and you don't care, because there's not going to be any punish for it on paper. Not in all situations, of course. Out of the high airs removes all the minions of the board when you move again, which is a very simple way for the wizard, for such a free people's in which a wizard is included. So that's another very important thing. And then Gandalf's stuff for extra safety. Is there any weakness though? Well, probably the biggest weakness of this culture could be Sauron, and if you really struggle with this culture, especially the Ents, in your current meta, then you can play Sauron 4 times, as I showed in the meta video, and then you have at least some answer to punish your opponent for playing these expensive companions, because Sauron probably uses the Twilight pool in the best way out of all the minions. Gondor. So, the pros of Gondor. Firstly, Gondor has a lot of vitality thanks to artifacts such as Anduril and Narsil, and some artifacts that prevent wounds. That is the sapling of the White Tree. And in general, the companions have either 3 or 4 or 5 vitality, which is a lot. There are even some ways how to heal the other companions, such as Banner of Westerners or Aragorn's ability to heal. It has a very good response to Swarm, thanks to Aragorn, Ranger of the North. There are some ways how to support archery strategies, but I do not recommend that too much. It's not too good. There is a similar card to Stand Against Darkness that not many people know about, and that is City of Men. So it discards a minion of Mordor culture at the end of a skirmish. That is very strong actually, because it gives you the opportunity to move again then, with 1 less minion on board. What this Free People's culture does even better is that it basically makes fun of any side control strategies thanks to Elendil's ability. So if you discard an artifact which your opponent has very difficultly managed to take control of, then you just liberate it by discarding an artifact which you don't even need against that particular strategy in that matchup. So that's why, as a Hillman player for instance, you really hate to see these Elendil builds, because it normally means that you are going to lose against it. Another thing that I need to mention, but not many people use it, not many people know about it. Drawing His Eye is a very essential card, and against any shadows which prepare some sort of setup. If you take for example some corruption builds, then this is your answer against that. Some helps a lot of course, but shadow strategies that want to corrupt your ring bearer are usually built around some sort of combination. So if you play this, you discard one of those essential cards, then your opponent doesn't manage to pull off his combo and you are safe. So that's why this is a very important card. A very famous representation of the Gondor culture are the Knights, and they are very interesting because they do not necessarily solve any of these points except perhaps for the strength. There are not many ways how to discard conditions and possessions unless you count the catapult. But what the Knights basically say is that we are going to play our conditions that are very strong, supported by our high vitality companions and high strength companions. We have a very strong ring bearer, and if you play some big minion, we just exhaust him and kill him in skirmish. So this strategy basically says, we are the bad guys, we basically dare you to make some sort of reaction to us, and we will see who has the better support area. That's how knights work. Very unique and interesting approach to how to play the game, and it works most of the time. There are some ways how to get rid of possessions as well, thanks to Derfin, and very often you see companions of the Gondor culture in other decks. Why? Because Faramir helps you deal with Gollum, with Easterlings, with some other skirmish based shadow strategies. Boromir, Son of Denethor, helps your hobbits to survive, so that's why you will very often see him paired up with Frodo as Ringbearer. Aragorn, as I mentioned before, helps you against Swarm, and that's about it from the most important things from the Gondor culture. Now moving on to Rohan. Rohan is very interesting because it is probably not better than the Ents or Gondor, even though you can pair it up with Leader of Men, but it has some very unique tools, such as Merry's Sword, which prevents a lot of shadow strategies which work around maneuver from doing anything. Then you exhaust the minions, you kill them by either a big Eomer or Rohirrim bow, and you move again. There is also a very simple way how to deal with sight control. Many people do not know about that, but Fel Deeds Awake gets rid of that problem. Then Deor and Leowyn are very key allies that spam cards in hand to give you some extra buffs for your free peoples. You are also able to discard conditions and liberate sites in another way by Let Us Be Swift, but it requires playing Valiant Man. It is actually worth it because thanks to the fact that you are able to discard conditions and liberate sites in such an easy way, you don't even need a big Eomer or Eowyn, Lady of Ithilien, because you will beat most of the difficult strategies that there are in the current meta. A way how to deal with possessions is arrow slits, but the problem is that the shadow is able to discard it before it even discards any shadow possessions, so that's why it is not the best way how to get rid of that. The weakest thing about Rohan is that it is not able to protect the Ringbearer in many ways. You have Defender thanks to Firefoot, and you have some way of killing off individual minions, but that's about it. If your opponent plays 8 minions, then the Ringbearer typically dies, and if you play an alternative Ringbearer for extra strength, then you are even less protected against corruption. So that's something to take under consideration, and you will probably have to make up for it somehow if you want to play Rohan in movie. Now the Shire culture, the Hobbits, they are especially very strong in Fellowship block, which makes sense because Frodo is the only playable Ringbearer there. There are some effective ways how to play Choke here. A talent for not being seen in combination with Build a Pony in Fellowship block make a great combination. There's a way how to deal with conditions, but it is a very unconventional and it requires a lot of investment in your free people's part for something that other cards from other cultures could do in a better way, such as Gandalf or the Elves. Then a very strong card in movie block is Narrow Escape, which removes minions in regroup, and there are some ways how to protect the hobbits from getting overwhelmed or killed in skirmish. In Fellowship block, a very strong card is Sting. I would say that this is the core for a beginner who wants to learn this game, because you don't know what your opponent is going to play. So you just exile Frodo, you take a look, and you see what's coming. So that helps you to know if you want to play that extra companion or not. Then some cards which are too overpowered for no big reason, I would say. Pippin, Wearer of Black and Silver, basically says that any shadow archery strategy is going to fail against your free peoples. So that's pretty strong for just one Twilight in your deck. Sam says that Corruption has a very hard time corrupting you. And Frying Pan in Fellowship Box says that any orc strategy is going to have a hard time killing you off. So the hobbits in general have a very strong responses to certain strategies. I forgot to mention Power According to his Stature, which says that Swarm is going to have a very hard time killing the Ring Bearer, because you just wound every minion in the Ring Bearer's skirmish. Some cons, well, obviously the strength of the hobbits, so that's why you often see them paired up with some strong companions, or companions that add strength to the hobbits, such as Boromir, which we took a look at a while ago. The last character that I'm going to mention is Smeagol, which you see as a supportive character in movie block. Smeagol Ringbearer is not really good in movie, it's better later on in War of the Ring and expanded formats. What is very strong in this culture, and it doesn't even require you to play any Smeagol cards in the deck whatsoever, but this, and that is the Clever Hobbits card, which disables the Gollum Shadow strategies in a very simple way. If you struggle against that strategy, you just play this 2 or 3 times in the deck and you make fun of it, just like that. Now Smeagol provides a very interesting way how to deal with strong minions through the Always Helps version of Smeagol, which exhausts the minion, and then you discard 3 cards and kill off any strong minion that you want. So this is very strong indeed, and what's more, if you play Don't Follow the Lights in the deck, then you are able to discard a minion for just 1 burden if Smeagol wins a skirmish in some way. Smeagol Slinker is a very useful companion if you have a free peoples that struggles early, because he's able to swallow a lot before he goes down, and that gives your free peoples some time to create a setup which it so essentially needs. And then Smeagol, Poor Creature, helps your free peoples to cycle through your hand if you struggle with that in general, and if you pair the deck up with some expensive shadow culture. Alright, so those are the cultures. I hope I was able to explain in a sufficient way what the pros and cons of these cultures are. More is going to be said in the next video about the shadow strategies, their pros and cons, and how they should be viewed in general in Lord of the Rings trading card game. And then we are going to take a look at the list of strategies and tier them according to their power. Thanks for watching.